My phone had been silent for almost 10 minutes when the doorbell rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the screen as if looking at it long enough might somehow change what I had just read. 57 missed calls were stacked beneath a dozen messages. Most were from my son, Ethan. A few were from his fiancée, Madeline, and the rest came from numbers I recognized only vaguely. Then the doorbell rang again. I didn't move. Another knock followed, harder this time. "Dad, I know you're in there." Ethan. 2 hours earlier, he'd told me I wasn't welcome at his wedding. Now he was standing outside my house in the rain, asking me to open the door. "My name is Richard Callahan. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being a good father meant making sure your child never had to face a problem alone. I learned the hard way that sometimes you can love someone so much that you make it too easy for them to forget what your love costs." I finally stood up. My house was unusually quiet that morning. Usually, I liked the quiet. After 40 years working in the wine business, I'd grown comfortable with slow mornings, black coffee, and the sound of rain moving across the windows. My wife, Laura, used to love mornings like this. She had been gone for 22 years. Cancer took her when Ethan was only 9. After that, there wasn't much time for me to fall apart. Ethan still needed breakfast. He needed someone to sign school forms, take him to baseball practice, sit beside him when he had nightmares, and pretend everything was going to be okay, even on the days I wasn't sure it would be. So I worked. I raised him. And somewhere along the way, I built a successful wine distribution company. I never thought of myself as particularly wealthy. I still drove an old pickup when I visited the vineyards. I still knew most of my workers by name. I never cared much about expensive watches or flashy cars. Ethan used to joke that I could afford anything, but still dressed like a man going to repair a fence. I didn't mind. He used to laugh when he said it. That was before Madeline came into his life. The phone call that morning had started normally. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said. "Morning. What time do you want me at the venue next Saturday?" There was a pause. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that." I stopped stirring my coffee. "About what?" Another pause. Then he said, "I don't think you should come." At first, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood him. "Come where?" "To the wedding." I gave a short laugh. "Ethan, I'm your father." "I know. Then why are we having this conversation?" He sighed. "Madeline doesn't want you there." I stared through the kitchen window at the wet driveway. "Why?" "She just thinks it would be better." "For who?" He didn't answer. "Ethan. She thinks you'll make some of her family uncomfortable." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "Have I done something to them?" "No." "Then what's the problem?" He hesitated. Finally, he said, "Dad, you're not really their kind of person." I almost asked him what that meant. Instead, I said, "And what kind of person am I?" Silence. That was the part that hurt, not the insult. Not even Madeline's opinion, the silence from my son. I looked toward the hallway, where an old photograph of Ethan hung on the wall. He was 6 years old in it, missing one front tooth and grinning so hard his eyes had nearly disappeared. I remembered taking that picture. He had insisted on wearing his baseball uniform, even though there was no game that day. "Ethan," I said quietly, "just tell me the truth." He took a breath. "She thinks you're embarrassing." I closed my eyes. There it was, after everything. After I had paid for their engagement party, helped them with the down payment on their first house, and bought them the vineyard where they planned to build their future. Just 1 week earlier, Madeline had hugged me and cried when I handed them the property documents. "Richard, this is too much," she'd said. I had smiled. "You don't have to thank me." She kissed my cheek. "You're incredible." Now I understood that some words sound very different once you know what was being said behind your back. I didn't argue with Ethan. I didn't threaten him. I didn't remind him how much money I'd spent. I simply said, "I hope you have a beautiful wedding, Dad. I mean it." Then I ended the call. For nearly 2 hours, I sat alone. Eventually, My phone started ringing again, once, twice, again and again. I ignored every call. Then the doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and opened it. My attorney, Margaret Hayes, stood on the porch holding a leather folder against her coat. She looked at me for a moment. "Richard," I said, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. She entered without another word. I knew Margaret well enough to recognize the expression on her face. Something had happened. Something Ethan hadn't told me. She placed the folder on my kitchen table. Then she looked directly at me. "You need to see this before you make any decision about that vineyard." I stared at the folder. "What happened?" Margaret opened it slowly. The wedding isn't the only thing they planned, and for the first time that morning, I realized Ethan's rejection might have had very little to do with embarrassment. Margaret didn't open the folder immediately. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and looked toward the window. "Before I show you this," she said, "I want you to understand something. I don't know what Ethan was told. I only know what I found." I nodded. "Show me." She slid a printed email across the table. It was from Madeline. The message wasn't long, but I read it twice anyway. She had been discussing the vineyard with her parents. They were already talking about renovations, guest accommodations, and how they wanted to turn the property into a private event venue. Then I saw the sentence that made me stop. "Once Richard transfers everything, we can finally stop pretending this is his decision." I looked up. "Transfers everything?" Margaret nodded. "The vineyard isn't the only asset they've been discussing." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I had always known money could complicate families. I'd seen it happen to other people. Brothers stopped speaking over inherited houses. Parents changed wills after arguments. Adult children became strangely interested in their parents' health when property was involved. I just never thought I'd be sitting at my own kitchen table, reading evidence that my son might be planning his future around my death. "Does Ethan know about this?" I asked. "I don't know." That answer bothered me more than anything else, because there was still a part of me that wanted to believe Ethan had simply been weak. Weak was easier to forgive than calculating. I pushed the email away. Maybe Madeline wrote it when she was angry. Maybe. You're not convinced. Margaret shook her head. No. I walked over to the coffee maker and poured myself another cup, even though I didn't really want it. "Did they ask you about my estate?" She hesitated. "Not directly. That isn't what I asked." She gave me a tired look. "Yes," I turned around. "When?" 3 months ago. My hand tightened around the mug. "What did they ask?" "They wanted to know whether the vineyard would pass to Ethan automatically if something happened to you." I stared at her. "And what did you tell them? That your estate was private?" She paused. "Richard, I should have told you sooner." I put the mug down. "No, you should have told me the moment they asked." I agree. That was the strange thing about Margaret. She never tried to soften bad news with excuses. I respected that. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept thinking about the last 6 months. Ethan had changed slowly. At first, I hadn't noticed. Our Saturday breakfasts became occasional lunches. Then the lunches became phone calls. Eventually, even those became short messages. "Bussy today, Dad. I'll call later." Later often never came. I had blamed his work, then Madeline, then marriage. I kept telling myself that adults build their own lives. Pont Krents are supposed to step aside. Maybe I'd stepped aside too far. Around 5, Ethan called again. This time I answered. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I need to explain." I sat down. "I'm listening." He was quiet for a moment. "Madeline's family has been under a lot of pressure lately." I frowned. "What kind of pressure?" "Her father lost money on a hotel project." That surprised me. "How much?" "I don't know exactly, Ethan," he exhaled. "Several million." I looked toward Margaret. She was watching me carefully. "So this is about money?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "Not exactly." But his voice had already answered for him. I closed my eyes. "Then tell me what you actually need from me." There was a long pause, Finally, Ethan said, "Dad, could we talk tomorrow? About the wedding?" "No." "Then about what?" His answer came quietly, "The vineyard." And suddenly the folder on my table felt much heavier than it had 5 minutes earlier. The next morning, Ethan arrived just after 9. He didn't come alone. Madeline was sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead while Ethan walked toward my front door. I could see them through the window, and for a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. That thought embarrassed me. This was my house. Why should I hide in it? I opened the door. "Morning." Ethan looked exhausted. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. Madeline gave me a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard." "Madeline." We sat in the living room. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan said, "Dad, I want to clear something up." "Go ahead." "The vineyard isn't about money." I looked at him. "Then why is it the first thing you wanted to discuss?" Madeline shifted in her chair, Ethan noticed. "Because, Dad, we've already made plans." "What kind of plans?" Madeline answered this time. "Nothing unreasonable." I waited. She continued. "We thought the vineyard could become something bigger." "Bigger than what?" "A private event property. Weddings, corporate retreats, small conferences. The location is perfect." I looked at Ethan. "And this was discussed before you. Ask me not to attend your wedding." Neither answered. That was enough. I leaned back. "When were you planning to tell me?" Ethan rubbed his forehead. "We were going to talk after the wedding." "After you had the property?" "No." "Then what?" Madeline finally looked at me. "We were hoping you'd transfer it into a family trust." I almost laughed. "You mean a trust controlled by you and Ethan?" "No, that's not what I meant." "Then explain it." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Ethan stepped in. "Dad, we weren't trying to take anything from you. You were planning a business on property you don't own." "I know." "Without asking me." He looked down. "I know." I looked at my son for a long moment. "You know what hurts most?" He raised his eyes. "I would have helped you." "I know." "No, Ethan, I don't think you do." My voice stayed calm, but I could feel the anger underneath it. "If you'd come to me and said, 'Dad, we have an idea, but we can't afford it,' I'd have sat down with you. We'd have looked at the numbers. Maybe I would have invested, maybe I wouldn't have. But we'd have had an honest conversation." Ethan swallowed. "We were afraid you'd say no." "Why?" He didn't answer. Madeline did. "Because you've always had the final say." I stared at her. "It's my property, I know." "And that's the problem?" She looked away. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the vineyard was wet from the previous night's rain. I spent years teaching Ethan that if he wanted something, he should work for it. Madeline said quietly, "And now you're angry because he wants more." "No." I turned around. "I'm angry because he stopped asking." The room went quiet. Then Ethan said something I wasn't expecting. "Dad, I did ask." "When?" "6 months ago." I frowned. "For what?" "The vineyard." I stared at him. He looked embarrassed. "I asked if you'd ever consider giving it to us. And I told you. You said you'd think about it. I don't remember that." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "You forgot." That landed differently. I sat back down. Maybe I had been so busy judging him that I had forgotten my own part in this. "I should have remembered," I admitted. Ethan nodded. "That was part of why I stopped bringing it up." I looked at him. "And instead you started making plans behind my back?" He looked down. "Yes." There was no excuse in his answer. But there was something human about it. Fear, entitlement, immaturity, probably all three. Madeline reached for Ethan's hand. I noticed the gesture. Then I noticed something else. A document sticking halfway out of her handbag. "What's that?" She froze. "Nothing." "Madeline." She slowly pulled it out. It was a financial proposal. I didn't need to read the whole thing. The first page showed projected revenue from the vineyard. At the bottom was an estimated annual profit, nearly $700,000. I looked at Ethan. "You already built the business plan." He didn't deny it. "When were you going to tell me?" He whispered. "After the wedding." I nodded slowly. Then I looked at the proposal again. The vineyard wasn't just a wedding gift anymore. They had already decided what my property was going to become. Without me, I handed the papers back. I think you should both leave. Ethan looked shocked. Dad, I need some time. Madeline stood first. Ethan remained seated. Are you still giving us the vineyard? I looked at my son. I don't know. That was the first honest answer I'd given him in months. And, for once, I wasn't saying it to make him feel better. I meant it. After Ethan and Madeline left, I didn't touch the proposal. I left it on the coffee table and went outside. The rain had stopped, but the vines were still dripping. I walked between the rows for nearly an hour, thinking about everything Ethan had said. The part that bothered me most was simple. He had asked me once. I had forgotten. That didn't excuse what came afterward, but it mattered. By the time I returned to the house, I had made one decision. I wasn't going to punish Ethan for being my son, but I was going to stop making his choices easier for him. I called Margaret. I need you to review the vineyard documents again. Are you transferring it? No, she was quiet. Are you certain? I want the property protected until I understand what Ethan actually intends to do with it. That can be arranged. I looked at the proposal on the table, and I want a trust drafted. For Ethan? Eventually, she understood, but with conditions, reasonable ones. That afternoon, I wrote Ethan an email. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't mention Madeline's parents or the wedding. I simply told him that the vineyard would remain under my ownership and that no business plans, bookings, renovations, or financial commitments could be made without my written approval. Then, I added one sentence. If you still want to build something there, come talk to me honestly. I expected an angry response. Instead, he called, Dad. Yeah, I read your email. I figured. You're really keeping it? For now. Because of Madeline? No. I paused. Because of you. He didn't understand. You said you wanted to build a business. I'm not going to hand you a $7 million property just because you're my son. If you want it, show me what you're capable of doing with it. There was silence. Then he said, So I have to earn it? No, I corrected myself. You have to learn how to carry it. He didn't respond immediately. Finally, he said, I think I understand. I hope so. He asked if we could meet without Madeline. I agreed. The next morning, we met at the vineyard. Ethan arrived early. That surprised me. We walked into the old tasting room and sat at the wooden table where Laura and I had once eaten lunch during harvest season. I showed him the financial records. He looked through them carefully. Then I asked, Do you know how much it costs to maintain this place every year? He shook his head. Not really. Then that's where we start. For nearly 3 hours, we went through expenses, payroll, taxes, repairs, insurance, and seasonal labor. There was no shouting, no emotional speeches, just numbers. At one point, Ethan leaned back and rubbed his eyes. I had no idea. Most people don't. I thought owning it meant making money from it. Sometimes owning something means spending money to keep it alive. He nodded. For the first time in months, I saw the boy I remembered. Not the polished version Madeline's family expected. Just my son, sitting across from me, realizing that a dream looked very different once someone handed you the bill. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Madeline. He didn't answer. A second message appeared. Then another. He turned the phone face down. I didn't ask what they said. I didn't need to. Ethan looked at me. Dad, I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I sat back. You don't have to decide today. What if I lose her? That will hurt. He looked surprised by my answer. But you'll survive it. He lowered his eyes. I added quietly. What I don't want is for you to lose yourself trying to keep someone else happy. He stayed silent for a while. Then he said, I think I've already done that. Neither of us knew what came next, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to solve it for him. And Ethan wasn't asking me to. We were simply sitting there, looking at the same old table where his mother had once packed our lunches. That felt like a beginning. Not a happy ending. Just a beginning. Ethan didn't leave the vineyard that afternoon. We stayed there until the light began to fade, talking about things we had avoided for years. He told me he had been trying too hard to fit into Madeline's family. They're all successful, he said. Her father owns hotels. Her mother knows everyone in Portland. I always felt like I had to prove I belonged. I understood that more than he expected. So you thought I was the problem. He looked uncomfortable. Sometimes. At least you're honest now. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. I thought your life made mine look small. That one hurt. I looked down at the table. Ethan, your life was never supposed to look like mine. I know that now. Do you? He nodded. Then he told me something I'd never heard before. Madeline had been comparing their future to mine for years. Your father has everything. Your father can solve this. Your father should give you the vineyard. Your father won't let you struggle. Ethan had slowly started believing that my success was something he was entitled to inherit, rather than something I had spent decades building. But he also admitted something else. She wasn't the only one responsible, he said. I looked at him. I let it happen. That mattered. Not because it erased what Madeline had done, but because Ethan was finally taking responsibility for his part. Then his phone rang. This time he answered. Hello? I watched his expression change. He didn't say much. Okay. A pause. No, I'll come home. He ended the call and placed the phone on the table. Madeline wants to talk. Then go. He looked at me. You're not going to tell me what to do? No, he smiled sadly. You used to. I know. We both laughed quietly. He stood before leaving. He stopped beside the door. Dad? Yeah? If she asks me to choose between her and you. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I answered anyway. Don't choose me. He looked confused. Choose the person you can live with after everyone else stops applauding. He stood there for a few seconds. Then he nodded. Okay. That evening, I stayed home. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone every 5 minutes. I made dinner for one, washed my plate, and sat in the living room with an old photograph of Laura. I told her out loud what had happened. It felt foolish, but somehow comforting. You'd probably tell me I was too stubborn. The room stayed silent. I smiled. You'd be right. Around 11, Ethan called. I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. Then he said, The wedding is off. I closed my eyes. Are you okay? No, I waited. But I think I will be. What happened? She said I was choosing poverty over my future. I didn't react. Then she said something else. What? She said. If I walk away from her, I walk away from everything her family could give me. I sat back. And what did you say? I told her I was tired of being someone's investment. For the first time that night, I smiled. That's my son. He laughed softly. Then his voice became serious. Dad, I'm sorry. I know. No, I mean it. I know. I should have protected you. I looked toward Laura's photograph. You should have protected yourself too. The next morning, Ethan came by again. No suit, no expensive car, just jeans, an old jacket, and a tired face. He placed his keys on the counter. I want to learn the business. I raised an eyebrow. It's not glamorous. I don't care. You'll start at the bottom. He nodded. And you won't be my boss. That surprised him. You'll work for the vineyard manager. He smiled. Fair enough. I watched him walk outside toward the rows of vines. For once I didn't follow. I let him go alone. Because sometimes loving your child means knowing when to stop carrying him. Ethan started working at the vineyard the following Monday. I made one rule clear from the beginning. He wasn't getting special treatment because he was my son. For the first few weeks, he worked alongside the seasonal crew, learned how the irrigation system worked, helped with inventory, and spent mornings in the warehouse. He complained once, only once. This is harder than I thought. The vineyard manager, Sam, looked at him and laughed. That's usually how work works. I heard about it later and smiled. Ethan didn't quit. That mattered more to me than anything he could have said. Months passed. We didn't suddenly become the father and son we had been when he was 10. Some wounds don't disappear because someone says sorry. There were awkward dinners, long silences, conversations that stopped halfway through because one of us wasn't ready to finish them. But there were also small things. He started calling on Saturdays again. Sometimes he asked about Laura. Sometimes he told me about his day. Once, he called simply because he had seen an old fishing photo and remembered something funny from when he was 12. I realized then that rebuilding a relationship isn't one grand moment. It's dozens of ordinary ones. A year after the wedding that never happened, Ethan and I stood beneath the same oak tree where we'd once argued about the vineyard. He handed me a folder. "What is this?" "The business plan." I opened it. This time, it was different. There were realistic numbers, conservative projections, maintenance costs, employee wages, and a section explaining how the property could support local charities without turning the vineyard into a commercial wedding factory. I looked at him. "You wrote this with help." "From whom?" "Sam." I smiled. "That explains why it makes sense." He laughed. Then he became serious. "I don't want you to give me the vineyard." I looked at him carefully. "Why?" "Because I finally understand what you were trying to teach me." He glanced across the rows of vines. "You built this over decades." I wanted to skip straight to the part where I benefited from it. "I didn't say anything," he continued. "I don't know if I'll ever deserve what you've built." I closed the folder. "You don't have to become me." He looked at me. "You just have to become someone who can be trusted with what comes next." He nodded. The vineyard eventually became part of a family trust. But Ethan didn't receive it outright. He had responsibilities. He had to learn the business, contribute to the community, and prove that he could manage something without treating it like an inheritance he was owed. He agreed without arguing. Madeline moved away a few months later. I never heard from her again. I don't hate her. I don't excuse what happened either. Both things can be true. As for Ethan, he never forgot the wedding. Neither did I. But eventually, the wedding stopped being the story of the day he rejected his father. It became the day both of us realized our relationship couldn't continue the way it had. One Saturday morning, years later, my phone rang while I was making coffee. "Dad?" "Morning." "You busy?" "Not yet." "Want to go fishing?" I smiled. "Thought you didn't have time for that anymore." There was a pause. "I've got time now," so we went. We caught almost nothing. Ethan laughed as he held up an empty fishing line. "We're still terrible fishermen." I looked at him. "No." He smiled. "We're making memories." For a second, I could almost hear Laura laughing somewhere behind us. I used to think the hardest part of being a father was protecting your child from pain. I know better now. Sometimes the hardest part is allowing someone you love to face the consequences of their own choices without running in to rescue them. I still love my son. I probably always will. But I finally learned that love doesn't require me to surrender my dignity, my property, or my peace. And Ethan learned something too. Being given something isn't the same as earning the right to carry it. That rainy morning, when he stood outside my door asking me to let him in, I thought he was coming back because he needed the vineyard. I was wrong. He came back because, somewhere along the way, he realized he needed his father. And this time, I opened the door, not because I had forgotten what happened, because I hadn't. I opened it because forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the wound never existed. It means deciding that the wound doesn't get to decide what happens next.